care. An important point is that providers should always keep the originals of all documentation and send a copy of the documentation to the case manager. Back to you, Dennis.
Thanks for that report, Denise. We will hear more from Denise later. From Casper today, it was reported that provider documentation is an important legal document. Sometimes documentation can be reviewed from a legal standpoint if questions should arise about services provided and may be used in a court hearing or legal hearings. From Evanston, it was reported that documentation must be legible. Do not use pencil, do not use whiteout, and do not scribble through the documentation. If you make an error, draw a single line through the error, make your correction, and initial the documentation. Remember, your documentation can be reviewed by CMS, DDD, and other audits, and the documentation must be able to be read by others. And now a word from our sponsor.
Hi. Are you in need of training to comply with Developmental Disabilities Division rules? You are not alone. Currently, Developmental Disabilities Division has an offer to get you on the road to success. Live and in person, the Program Integrity Team will be at a location near you. Please check out our website at www.health.wyo.gov/DDD for times, dates, and topics. Currently, some of our hot topics include incident reporting, conducting successful team meetings, and recertification. As an added bonus, Developmental Disabilities will mail you your very own free DVD on a variety of training. For more information, please call toll-free at 1-800-510-0280 today.
From Riverton, it was reported earlier today that documentation should be concise, factual, and professional. Documentation should only provide information that pertains to the services provided. Providers should avoid vague terminology or drawing conclusions without supporting information. Now back to the field to Denise, who is somewhere in Wyoming.
Dennis, I want our viewers to know that it was just announced that providers should always use the WIDE approach when documenting. The WIDE approach stands for Write It Down Every Day. Please remember, documentation should happen immediately after the service has occurred. Providers should never document services before the service is provided, as this is fraud. Now back to Dennis at the DDD News Network.
Thanks for that up-to-date report, Denise. We just received breaking news from Gillette that providers need to remember. If a provider does not have documentation showing a service has been provided, then your documentation does not support payment for that service. If payment has been received, the provider will be required to pay the money back following a Medicaid recovery process. A provider's documentation will be referred for recovery of funds if documentation does not match the units billed or if there is no documentation for services billed. It is important that providers ensure their documentation meet the documentation standards, and failure to do so will result in a recovery of funds. All providers are responsible to ensure that their documentation meets the documentation standards, regardless of who developed the documentation form. Providers will be referred to the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit if there is any suspicion of fraudulent activity, including billing for services not documented or tampering with documentation. From Laramie, it was reported this evening that providers are responsible for keeping track of the number of units you have used and know how many units of service are left. Providers should notify the case manager of any concerns with units to ensure the participant will continue to receive services. The case manager will also monitor this on their monthly ISC tracking form as part of their role in monitoring the participant's plan of care. And finally tonight, we close with this newscast with Denise, back in Somewhere in Wyoming.
Dennis, our final report of the night takes place on the outskirts of Somewhere in Wyoming. People have been gathered around listening to a gentleman speak about how they can get paid. Basically, he said that documentation is your timesheet. It is how you get paid. You need to know what is expected when documenting. Remember to always have a time in and time out using either AM and PM or military time. There must be a signature on each page of documentation. You always need to have the date of service, including the year, month, and day. You must include details of the service provided and make sure the name of the participant and type of service is on each page of documentation. Well, Dennis, that wraps it up here from Somewhere in Wyoming.
Thanks, Denise. That was a lot of information on documentation from around Wyoming. One last reminder for providers. If the participant is absent from services such as being on vacation or illness, providers should not document any services or times attended and simply write the reason for the absence for that day. Let's hope our viewers have heard the importance of reading and following the current documentation standards. For everyone at the DDD News Network, this is Dennis Yost saying good luck and good documenting.